right, please welcome Mr. Michael Moore and Mr. Robert Reich.
Which one of us had the late night? We were just discussing, well, yesterday I said we were twin sons of different mothers, and yeah. And that's, it doesn't really matter though. Interchangeable. We're just discussing backstage that neither of us have a brother, and so we've decided to be each other's brother. And that nature has strange ways of putting ourselves together. I'll take these off, sorry about that. Welcome. Wow, what a great crowd. Look at this on a Saturday morning. Thank you for coming.
It's a beautiful Saturday morning.
And
people choose to be here rather than
outside. Yeah, well,
thank you.
These are the brainiacs, the wonkiacs, and the people that want to discuss these issues on a Saturday morning. And I assume people who care deeply about what's going on in our country. How many have seen his film so far? Okay, great. And who's going today to see it? Excellent. Okay, perfect. Well, as I said yesterday, I just, maybe I have too much faith in our fellow Americans, and I realize sometimes I'm, as upset as I am at many things, I actually am a real strong optimist, and I believe that people, when presented the information and the facts, will come around. We certainly saw that with the Iraq War. People were told there were weapons of mass destruction, and, what are you going to do if you're being told that someone's going to kill you? And so most Americans supported the war. Once they learned the truth, and had the facts and understood, within really just 3 years, the majority of Americans were against the war. Okay, so we're a nation of slow learners. But we have a good heart, and I think the majority of us have a conscience, and we know right from wrong. And Mr. Reich, what you've done is an incredible service, you and Jake, by making this film, because I believe this is something every American should see. And except those who can't get into the Opera House today.
Mr. Moore, please call me Bob.
Okay, all right. Yes, Professor.
Or Your Excellency, that would...
Those of you who haven't seen the film are going to discover that the comedian of the festival is Bob. And he should come back to our comedy festival in the winter. Seriously, your wit, your sense of humor, your good grace with people is just an amazing thing to watch in this movie. Many of us have known you, first as a Secretary of Labor in Bill Clinton's administration, and then as a commentator on CNN or other networks. But I had no idea just really how funny you are, and I'm not going to do any short jokes. You do the best short jokes in the movie. No, I mean I think I've always believed that humor is a great vehicle through which to deliver.
Humor is the best disinfectant. And when you are talking to people who disagree with you about profoundly important things, you can find common ground by laughing. And that forms one of the most important human bonds. And also, if you want to get across some very difficult, complicated stuff, the way people open their minds is they laugh first, and then they can hear. And you know that. You do that all the time. I mean, you are a master. But I think that sometimes we tend to think of the economy and politics and the serious stuff kind of over here, and then, the funny stuff over here. Most of my kids, most of my students, I shouldn't call them my kids, most of my students, they get most of their news from Jon Stewart. And Colbert, yeah.
Yeah, I've come to believe that the Colbert Show is actually even a step. With
Except that half America doesn't know he's being satirical.
Right. Right. So he's our guilty pleasure after Jon Stewart provides the. No, that's. Yeah. What is that about us as Americans? Because again, the Canadians and Brits and Irish and whatever, they get satire, they get the ironic statement, but there is something about the very first show I was ever on when Roger and me came out was the Today Show. And it was Jane Pauley's last day or second to last day on the show. I sit down in the chair, I'm very nervous, and she leans over to me and she says, you know, my husband, Gary Trudeau, Dewsbury, I feel really bad for you, she says to me. I said, why? She says, because 50% of this country is going to look at you and not understand. They're going to think that you're serious when you say these things, because 50% of America doesn't get irony or satire. So you're heading up a rough road here.
Well, not only that, but we tend to like our politics in a very angry form. I was on a television show not that long ago, and I was debating a conservative economist who had been one of Romney's advisors, and we actually discovered that once we got underneath the surface, the platitudes, there was a lot of agreement. I mean, because, you know, basically Americans really, you know, there's a lot of agreement. We don't know it. But in the station break, in my little earbud, she said, the producer, she said, I said, we're going pretty well, you know, we got the first segment, she said, be angrier. And I said, well, why should I be angrier? Because we're really modeling what we need in this country, which is more people, you know, understanding what's going on, and that it's not just all conservative versus liberal. And she said, well, you got to be angrier. And we have 20 seconds. I said, I don't want to be angrier. Why? And she said, because people are surfing through hundreds of channels, and they will stop when they see a mud wrestling, sort of a gladiator fight. And I said, well, that doesn't serve the public. I'm not going to be angry. She said, you have to be angry, 10 seconds. And and it was right then that I lost my temper with her. But it's sort of that two-pronged. It's lack of irony, but it's also sort of you know, slugging it out. And I think both of them disserve us.
I'm glad we've started actually with this particular topic, because yesterday after the movie we dove kind of quickly into, well, what are we going to do to fix it? And you made this very good point that actually before we do that, and we do need to come up with the solutions and get together and politically organize, that we ourselves need to educate each other and ourselves about the facts, about how we got into the situation we're in, so that we can, as we talk to our neighbors and coworkers and family members, be able to explain the situation we're in, the dire straits that are taking place, the gap that's growing wider and wider. And because if we're unable to do that, we're going to probably be unable to convince them to come along with us on the things that we're going to want to do to fix this. So I'd like to this morning talk both about these facts to educate ourselves, ones that we can very easily explain in a non-wonky way, because when you talk economics and that ever, you know, this is when the glaze starts in the eyes. But also then how we do it, such as you said, you know, through humor being the great disinfectant and bringing people together and that sort of thing. And I've had the same experience on these shows. And a long time ago, I basically just made a blanket. I won't go on when they had the old Crossfire, you know, because they just want people to yell. I will not appear on any show with Ann Coulter. There's like 5 people. I am not into the gladiator blood sport thing. I get no kick out of taking her down. You know, I've taken O'Reilly down a couple times, and it's like for a moment it feels good to see him go blah 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 blah. But then it's like
no, it doesn't do it.
But later you just
George Stephanopoulos has he has a Sunday show, and a while back, and he always used to, when he invited me on, tell me who else was going to be on.
Who was this?
George Stephanopoulos.
George.
And on one Sunday, he didn't tell me, and I got there, and we have, we're going onto the set, and I'm sitting there, and who comes on but Ann Coulter, right next to me. Right next to me. When she's, it's one thing to have her 3 feet away.
We got the image.
I mean,
right next to you.
Right next, and she's tall and loud, very tall. Do you know? I mean, she's very tall, very thin, extremely thin, very tall, and very loud. And I had at that time, I had a cold in one of my ears, and every time she talked, it was physical pain. Not just mental pain, it was physical pain.
Most of us don't need the cold in our ear to have that with her. I just want to say.
I know. It's just so. No, the whole purpose. I mean, we did this. The film is sort of we consider it a kind of inconvenient truth for the middle class and everybody aspiring to join the middle
with
class.
humor. Sorry, Al Gore. Yeah.
So you do think I'm funnier than Al Gore? You said that. You said that yesterday, and
as I said yesterday, that's really setting the bar low. As I said yesterday, it's.
That made my day, Michael. Thank you. And
so you were there with Ann Coulter and.
Well, no, it is. I mean, it's we.
By the way, I actually believe someday she's going to come clean with the public and say that this has all just been one big performance art piece on her part.
But see, in a way,
she doesn't really believe all that stuff.
In a way, she's an entertainer, and a lot of what we see on television, a lot of what passes for public debate is really entertainment, whether it's a gladiator fight or whether it's something else. We don't really have a forum any longer for a serious discussion. Now, granted, it does have to have humor, because as we've been talking, but one of my best friends is Alan Simpson, former senator from. Now, Alan and I mean, first of all, he really is 6'5". He and I see eye to eye on nothing. I mean, even when we're sitting, we don't see eye to eye. But I used to, but we struck up a great friendship out of humor, and he's now, on the liberal end of the Republican Party. I mean, he was telling me the other day they won't even talk to him anymore because he's so liberal. When he was he was almost the majority leader of the Senate in the 1990s, and we got so friendly that we used to have lunch together, but our staffs would tell us not to do it. So both of us, he snuck out of his Senate office. I snuck out of the Department of Labor. And it was like having an illicit affair. We'd get together for lunch, and we'd kind of look around, make sure nobody was around, no Republicans saw us, no Democrats. And he's in the movie. But he gets it. He's still dead wrong about a lot of stuff. But he understands a lot of this. I mean, for example, the idea that the rich are job creators.
He doesn't go along with that anymore.
He doesn't go along with that, and it is completely the job creators are the middle class and everybody who wants to join the middle class because they're the ones who buy. And if you don't have buying in an economy, you don't have any jobs. I mean, this is not rocket science.
What's interesting though is when someone like him, and we all have Republicans in our families, and I didn't say that sadly. I just meant that I was just recalling a Thanksgiving dinner that I won't go into now, but we all have Republican friends and neighbors and coworkers and whatever, and I do find that if they're somewhat open-minded. And if they respect intelligence and facts, when presented with facts, as you've presented them to him, they're not going to necessarily vote for Democrats, but they are going to go, well, you're right. These rich have not created a whole heck of a lot of jobs. And and I think too, part of this is what we're talking about here this morning is how we make our case, because I think that's very important. You and I are proud of what we believe in and all that, but I don't get off on being just talking to the church of the left. I don't think we're going to get anywhere if we stay.
No. In fact, when I do a lot of speaking to groups, and when I'm in a room or an auditorium where I'm saying things and everybody is nodding in agreement, I say to myself, what am I doing here? I'm speaking to the converted. I ought to be talking to people who say, no.
But do you think the reverse is true, that as liberals, are we open-minded enough to listen to a fact that they may have where we would go, oh, I never really thought of it that way? I know part of the problem is that much of what comes from the other side of the fence, like, Adam and Eve wrote on dinosaurs 6,000 years ago, are not facts. So it's difficult to have that kind of debate, or that a fertilized egg is an actual human being.
Well, I think that these labels, liberal, conservative, mean less and less and less if you get really into it. The division in this country right now, I think, is between progressives, that is, who really believe in equal opportunity, and the fundamental building blocks of this country, in terms of anybody with enough guts and gumption and hard work should be able to make it. That is the rock bottom belief that we've had for 250 years. And
if you work hard and the company prospers, you prosper.
Yes,
but that changed.
And the rising tide does lift all the boats. And and we all, and that we're all in this together. It's not a matter of somebody can do well if nobody else does well. The rich would do much better in this country if they had a smaller portion of a rapidly growing economy than they have. Right now is a big chunk of an economy that's growing, 1.7% a year. This is nothing.
Explain that, because you said it last night also, that because anybody who has money will have a hard time accepting what you just said, but you can actually prove that if they took less but had a faster growing economy, that they would still do it not only very well, maybe even better, and have longer term security for their wealth than the way they're doing it now, which is it has a feeling of when Teddy Roosevelt had to stop the lumber industry from just tearing down the entire country's forests and say, look, we have to think about 5 generations from now. There's no thinking like that going on amongst the wealth of the people who have the money.
But even here too, there are people like Warren Buffett, who and Bill Gates and others who say, well, this is crazy. The 400 wealthiest Americans have more wealth than the bottom 150 million put together. You can't run an economy, let alone a society. Let's put society. Let's come back to the issue of, are we a society and how do you? But you can't run an economy, and the rich would do much better. You see, the economy. The reason the economy is growing so slowly, the real reason, is because the median wage. Now, anytime somebody talks about median as opposed to average, you've got to listen carefully, because average wages are going up, but averages mean nothing. Shaquille O'Neal, the basketball player, and I have an average height of 6'1". You get it? This is why averages don't mean anything, because the people at the top pull up the average. So you want to look at the median. The median is halfway, half above, half below, and the median wage is now almost 5% below, adjusted for inflation. You always have to adjust for inflation. Median wage is 5% below what it was at the start of the recovery, so-called recovery. So even though jobs are coming back, actually wages are dropping. So, if you've got, we could continue to create a lot of jobs as long as wages. It's not a great achievement to create more jobs at lower wages. Theoretically, slavery was a full employment system. Do you follow me? And so you're not going to have enough aggregate demand for all the goods and services the economy is capable of producing if people don't have jobs and wages. Now, Henry Ford understood this principle. You know, this is the old idea that you pay your workers enough so they can turn around and buy all the stuff that they're making. And we used to, I mean, certainly by the 1950s and 60s in this country, we had this kind of basic bargain. And it was enforced by the fact that 35% of Americans belonged to a labor union and that had bargaining leverage to get a fair chunk of the economy. But now but that was because, see, labor unions were good for the economy, and they were good for the wealthy because they meant that people could turn around, they'd have enough money, they could turn around and buy all the stuff that we were capable of producing, and even the rich did better because the economy was growing so fast. And a lot of people don't realize that we had a tax rate that before 1981, the top tax rate never fell below 70%. Between the end of the Second World War and 1981, and the effective rate, that is the rate even after all the deductions, all the tax credits people actually paying, it was never below 54% on the top. But that was okay because the economy was growing so fast and everybody was doing better. It was a virtuous cycle. We get into this.
But those, if you're old enough to remember the 50s and 60s and 70s, and those of you who aren't, there's pictures of it. Do you remember rich people, right, when we were growing up, seemed to do quite well? I remember driving through Grosse Pointe and Bloomfield Hills. And,
they did better. They did better, Michael. That's my point.
They did. No, I'm saying, that's what I'm saying. Even paying that high tax rate, they
did better than they're doing now. Relatively speaking, with an economy that grew faster, we were growing as an economy over 3.5% a year in those years, because the middle class and the working class and labor unions, created a mass consumption system.
And didn't labor unions also, because they fought for higher wages and better benefits and a vacation,
a 40-hour work week.
The 40-hour work week, don't have 12-year-olds on the assembly line. Because they did that for their industries, it seemed, as I remember growing up in Flint, that even those who didn't have union jobs, the other employers and businesses were forced to, because in order to keep competing for workers or whatever, had to then raise their wages.
That's right.
And provide some benefits.
You set prevailing wages throughout the system. Right. So you had people who had money in their pockets. They could buy what they were producing. The economy was growing fast. The rich were doing better because they had a smaller share, but of a rapidly growing economy. Under Dwight Eisenhower, the highest marginal tax rate on the very rich was 91%. Eisenhower.
There's pictures from back then, too. The wealthy had really nice boats.
So we kind of forget our history. And the people who now many of the people who call themselves Republicans don't remember the history. They don't even remember Eisenhower. They don't even think Eisenhower was a Republican.
He'd never make it through the primaries today, right?
Well,
do you agree with that?
Well, Mark Hatfield of Oregon, and and Nelson Rockefeller, and I mean there were Republicans who today would not be admitted to the party, and even in the party today, Boehner can barely keep control.
Our governor here for many years, William Milliken, was a Republican, but
my father was a Republican. My grandfather was Republican. My first job in Washington was in the Ford administration. In fact, I'm going to admit something that I don't think I've ever admitted before. Can you keep it in this room?
Am I going to have to leave the stage?
No, just
all right, don't let me. I don't want to get sad.
Okay, my first boss in Washington, I guess I was 27 years old. My first boss in Washington was Robert Bork. Now, he had, you know, he's passed away now, but this was before he had that Supreme Court nomination fight. He was very funny. And I worked with him. He was Solicitor General of the United States, and I had a law degree, and I was supposed to help prepare cases and stuff for Supreme Court adjudication. And even though we disagreed, he and I disagreed on the First, Second, Fourth, Fifth, Eighth, and Ninth Amendments. Almost all of them. In fact, actually, if you go up higher, we disagreed on every one of them. But he was funny, a good sense of humor, a nice guy, and he listened. You know, we had good debates. But my point is that in those days, it was possible to have discussions. I mean, I used in the film we did. You know, Jake found clips. I didn't even remember them. I was on Bill O'Reilly's show. I substituted for Bill O'Reilly on a number of occasions, and Sean Hannity and I were old chum. I mean, I didn't change. So something dramatic has happened, and even Alan Simpson in the film says, you know, these new people who have taken over the Republican Party, you know, they are different. They are really different. They don't have opponents; they have enemies.
So how do we win the debate? Because we don't want to operate with this attitude of having to demonize the person who we disagree with. They're suddenly less than human because, you know, they believe Adam and Eve wrote on dinosaurs 6,000 years. I may say that because it's funny, but I don't hate them for that.
No, you know, we've talked about some of the elements here already. Number one, understand the nature of the problem. You know, see our film. Because the solutions to the problem come out of a real understanding of what's going on. And a lot of people don't have that understanding. Number two, use humor. Number three, talk to people who disagree with you and see where there is any common ground at all. There is a fact-based universe, and stay in that fact-based universe and don't demonize. Now, you're not going to convince everybody. I mean, there are fanatics out there. And there's an interesting question, Michael, and I don't have the answer to it. And you face it here in Michigan, and a lot of people across the country do. Do you want the real right-wing fanatics, I mean the regressives, to take over, or at least to take over the Republican Party? Now, I don't. But on the other hand, there's an argument that if the fanatics really do, then they will show themselves to be such fanatics. The rest of the country, including a lot of independents, will say, oh my God, you know, let's get them out of there. You know, Winston Churchill once said that Americans always do the right thing eventually, once we've exhausted all other alternatives.
My fear is, and you heard a bit of a sigh when you said that, because they have revealed themselves here in Michigan, where this is a blue state that voted for Obama, and yet our legislature and our governor's house is controlled by a minority, the Republicans, and they've been up to a lot of, you know, crazy stuff. The chance of the Republican governor winning re-election next year is great, even after 4 years of this. The country saw 4 years of George W. Bush after he wasn't elected, and then thought, you know what, I like that, and then actually then elected him to his first term. It was, I mean, like I said, I am an optimist, but I think a lot of people in here share this. It's not cynicism, but there's a real. The wind has been kicked out of us a number of times, where some people don't know how to get back up. And use the example, last night a librarian from Detroit stood up and asked Bob, what about my pension? How can I get my pension? And in a very polite way, I thought I was really impressed with how you handled that, because I'll give the translation of what you...
The impolite translation.
Yes. because I thought that maybe some people didn't get it because you were so nice and respectful, as you should be to her, and because everybody feels bad about anybody in Detroit who can't get their pension now. But Bob's point is that yes, that's bad, but you have to pick yourself up. We just can't stay in this place of, well, I'm not getting my pension, and so therefore, we have to organize. You do have to say you don't. I said this. People don't have the time to organize. They've got 2 jobs. Everybody, listen. Our parents and grandparents. My uncle was in the sit-down strike in Flint in 1936 that founded the UAW. Talk about not having any time or having a horrible situation of hardly being able to put food on the table. Yet they found the time to organize. They started that strike on the day before New Year's Eve. That's not really the day you organize a political movement, but that's when they did it.
Well, not only did the workers of the 1930s have a great deal of courage and idealism in the face of terrible, terrible circumstances, but young people come up to me and say, "Isn't it awful? I mean, politics and it's just hopeless." And I say to them, I graduated from college in 1968. Some of you may remember 1968. Talk about a bad year. Martin Luther King is assassinated, Robert F. Kennedy is assassinated, the cities are burning down, Richard Nixon becomes president, George Wallace, segregation forever, gets 5 million votes. I mean, talk about bad times. Vietnam War is raging. I have friends who are being killed. I go down to the Oakland Induction Center because I get my report, to show up, and I think I'm too short. But this examining sergeant sees me walk down, and his eyes light up. And I thought to myself, what's going on? He says, "You're perfect." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because we need tunnel rats." To go under the rice paddies and flush the VC out with hand grenades. And I saw my life just pass before my eyes. And then, we went to the height thing when you stand there, and there was nobody around. And I thought, well, he could do whatever he wants. And the thing comes down. I'm under 5 feet. I know that I can't qualify. They don't have uniforms my size. But he puts his hand down on my shoulder. He says, "I'm sorry, son." Now, I didn't know whether he was sorry because I was too short or sorry that I was going to get killed in the rice paddies. He says, I said, "Yeah." He said, "You're too short." And then I didn't know whether to go, "Oh." And then he would say, "Oh, but I can do something for you." Or go, "Yeah," in which he said, "Come back here." So I just, I kind of. But these years, people don't remember how bad it was. And we fought against the Vietnam War, and the civil rights movement continued haltingly, and we continued to fight on that front. And people were the country was divided. Or go back to the 50s, go back to the Joe McCarthy era, and the communist witch hunts, and the intimidation in this country. I mean, we bounce back. We are resilient. When people in this country understand what's going on, when they understand the facts, common sense does prevail. We've been in much more difficult circumstances than we are now. And so anybody who is cynical, and cynical to the point of just feeling hopeless, just doesn't know their history. And they've got to get organized and mobilized and make change. Nothing good, and this is something else we talked about yesterday. I was in Washington for years. Nothing good happens in Washington unless people outside Washington, good people, are mobilized and organized and energized to make good things happen in Washington. Otherwise, the moneyed interests are running everything. And this is not brand new. Yes, we got to reverse Citizens United. Yes, we have to get, big money out of, but money has always been in politics, and if people are not vigilant and if they're not organized, politics just starts drifting away from what it ought to be in this
So
country.
what do you recommend then to people here, and especially to Michiganders, of, okay, we're not going to be cynics, and we're going to believe that, we do have the power. There are more of us than there are of them, and I don't mean the other side of the fence. I mean the 1% that are. So what can we actually do? What to organize? What would you tell people here of what very specific things maybe that.
Well, I'll tell you. I mean, very specifically, last week I was, in San Diego County in California.
Actually,
What are you doing here? Okay, so the northern part of the county is very conservative, right?
It's
very
where Orange County meets
very
San Diego
Republican.
County. It's a
and
very,
Darrell Issa and a lot of, I mean, they're people, they're. So the northern part of San Diego County, you've got, and I'm not even called Republican and Democrat. You've got progressives who felt very isolated and very hopeless because the only people they could see all around them were people who, had very, very different political beliefs. So what they started to do, they used the social media to start organizing and finding out who they were, and then they all got together. There's no substitute for face-to-face. Can't do it on social media. You can find each other, but you really do have to see people face-to-face. They got together. I was there, over 500, 600 people in northern San Diego County just last week, and they were organizing, they were mobilizing, they were targeting, they were getting ready for the congressional races in 2014, which are going to be tremendously important. And they were feeling something that a lot of people in this country, regardless of your political persuasion, don't feel very much, and that is a sense of power. Most people feel powerless. They feel just vulnerable. Unemployment is still high. A lot of people are living from paycheck to paycheck. They just feel like they're alone. And when you get together with 500 other people who feel like you do in terms of changing this country, there's a feeling of power. And that's what happens. And we got to be doing it all over the country.
So one thing we need to do here, say in Traverse City, is because, and maybe I'm not aware of it. I mean, but there are not a lot of things. I mean, people. I mean, there's small groups. There's a Great Peace group here, and there's a Quaker group, and there's a Middle East Peace and Justice. There's all these. The groups you'll find all over the country, but say for 500 people to come together here in northern Michigan, that would be an amazing, and have a meeting of, hey, what are we going to do to turn things around here? Because I believe things do get better. I mean, this last election, I mean, this is a very conservative part of Michigan. It's usually votes Republican, with the exception of the city of Traverse City. And yet, the county next to us, Leelanau County, voted for Obama. The county below us, Manistee County, voted for Obama. Over in the middle part of northern Michigan, going down to Clare, they voted for Obama, the county. I mean, it was really, I don't know if you saw the map, but it was really kind of an interesting. I thought, I'm sure people were surprised. They didn't even know that there were other people for Obama. You don't see many stickers on the cars and places like that. And what you just said is so important. And I really, I hope some people here, take it to heart and think about what we can do, and not wait for the local, say, Democratic Party.
Yeah, don't wait. And also, don't be bound by these labels, Democrat and Republican, because, they are very divisive, they're very polarizing, they're very, by definition, partisan. And get out of your bubbles. I mean, we put ourselves in a bubble. It's very easy for us all to sort of only seek out people who agree with us, and only live in places where people agree with us, or only visit social media sites. The social media, the internet now, you can convince yourself that everybody in the world agrees with you because the only thing you see, because of the algorithms that sort of are specifically designed to give you what you want. Well, you could believe in anything, Martians, and you get everybody who believes in Martians, talks to you, and you get Martian, websites, and you get, and you think, well, boy, the Martians really are all over the place here. So get out of the bubble talk to people who may disagree with you. You'll find that a lot of people actually, if you get under the surface, there's a lot of agreement. I drive across the country as much as I can, because I used to teach and live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and then I moved to Berkeley, California, on the other side of the country, completely different place. That's not true. It's the same town. They just transplanted from Cambridge. But in between, there's a lot of difference. So I rode my car.
You needed to use Ann Arbor and Madison as your examples here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I drove from Cambridge, Massachusetts to Berkeley, and I do that a lot. And I drive, and I'm going to tell you the car that I drive, and maybe in Michigan you're not going to like it, but it actually parts come from all over. They come from Michigan. That's a Mini Cooper. Okay? I like it because it's a little car. So I'm driving, years ago when I first drove the Mini Cooper, I drove across, I was in Oklahoma. I was in a gas line, waiting for gas. And these big truckers came up to my car. And they knocked on the window. And I lowered the window. And I said, "Can I help you?" They said, "We've never seen a car like this." And I said, "Well, it's a Mini Cooper." And I guess there were no Mini Coopers in Oklahoma. And they said, "How can anybody fit in here?" So I opened the door, I got out, I said, "There's no problem." And they turned around and they just slowly walked off, muttering to themselves. Well, look, the thing is that we got to talk. I have a lot of great conversations in red states and red communities with people, and yes, there is a fanatical small group, and by fanatical, I mean there are fanatics on the left too. By fanatics, I simply mean people who just don't listen. They don't want to listen. They have a belief system. It's an emotional system. It's not actually has nothing to do with anything else. And you're not going to convince the fanatics. But most Americans, this country is so pragmatic when it comes down to it. I mean, every time we really historically have been up against it, we roll up our sleeves collectively and we get on with what has to be done. We are the most pragmatic country in the world in that respect. So talk to people. Organize, mobilize, get independents involved, avoid the fanatics, and create a political movement.
Our side doesn't have as many fanatics as the other side. You would. I mean, we have the people who believe 9/11 was an inside job. I don't know who else do we have besides me. No, but seriously though, I saw this poll. 19% of Republicans believe that Obama, quote, may be the Antichrist. But you're right. We shouldn't focus on that and shouldn't be frightened by it because that's not what the majority think of, who are people who consider themselves conservatives. But give this crowd 3 facts that if they are at that Thanksgiving dinner or they're talking to somebody who wants to have a conversation, what are the 3 facts about our economy and why we're in the place that we're in and what we could maybe sort of rethink this or help someone else rethink it?
Well, we've talked about some of them. Number one, when we have, for the 3 decades after the Second World War, when we had the highest taxes on the rich, we grew as an economy faster than we've grown since.
Fact.
Right? That's fact. Another fact is, and Michael, you were the one who actually I first heard this, and then I went back and checked the fact. The 400 richest Americans have more wealth than the bottom 150 million put together. We haven't had that degree of concentrated income at the top since 1890. So that's a fact. Third fact is that the 2 years in this century when the top 1% took home more than 23% of total income, there were 2 years, 1928 and 2007. Now, what do we know about those years? They're interesting years because each of those years precedes an economic collapse, much bigger one in 1929, but nevertheless very big and scary in 2008. Why is it? Because when you get that much concentrated income and wealth at the top, the economy can't function. The middle class can't continue to buy unless they go deeper and deeper and deeper into debt. And those debt bubbles burst. They burst in 1929, they burst in 2008. That's a fact. People can get those things. So there are a lot of economic realities that I think people, and I could go on and on and on, but you know, a fact-based discussion.
And these are such good and simple and sometimes shocking facts that people will repeat them. They'll tell them. I mean, when I came up with that thing about the richest 400 make more than the bottom 150 or 160 million. Right away, PolitiFact and all these, they were like right on me, and oh, that can't be true. And then they did this whole investigation on, they ran the story. He's 100% correct. These are journalists who were shocked, and they're supposed to be reporting and working on this every day. So, but I saw that just spread, like and it was like, wow, you know, just the power of information and facts with those, and I believe most people want to hear facts, not the 19% that's way over there, or the 5% that's way over here. But let me ask you this, because this is maybe where you and I have a place of a disagreement. I made a movie called Capitalism: A Love Story, and the point I wanted to make essentially is that capitalism, not the old school capitalism, but capitalism as it has become, as we define it now. And I prefer to operate in present terms. When I say the word marriage, I'm not talking about the way marriage was in the 1700s. I'm talking about the way we structure it now. I just have come to believe that this is really an economic system that is unfair, it's unjust, it's not democratic. I mean, we don't really have a whole lot of say in how this economy is structured and run. And it seems like it has done a lot of harm to people, and that perhaps we need to come up with something else or modify this in some way, because capitalism as we know it, I just think is really, as I interviewed a bishop and Catholic priest in the film, and they basically said what Pope John Paul II had said, that capitalism is a sin. He said capitalism is a sin, because it's modern day capitalism, because it has set up a thing where very few benefit and everybody else scrambles for the crumbs. You in the film say, hey, you know, capitalism is not necessarily, doesn't have to be this bad thing, and it can be a good thing. And I'm just curious how you feel about that. And I assume you saw my movie and then you had, and maybe disagreed with some of the conclusions that I came to.
Well, I think it's the place where you begin the discussion. That's the question. That is, I just in terms of my philosophy, my training, the way my mind works, I'm not very good at, and I don't really enjoy, you know, talking about capitalism per se, or socialism, or whatever, because I don't know.
Isms in the
I don't
as
know
a
what
theory.
I don't know what they mean exactly. I mean, but if you talk to me about a living wage, yeah, we need a living wage. If you talk to me about single payer, yes, we need single payer, in my view. If you talk to me about resurrecting Glass-Steagall so Wall Street doesn't turn the economy into a casino again, yes, we need to do that. So I mean, I think antitrust ought to be used against the 5 biggest Wall Street banks, and just like Standard Oil, get them smaller, because we got to get banking back to being boring again, like it was in the 1950s. So my approach is, it's the capitalism. I don't know what to do with the word. I think that there are about 12 to 15, to me, very important changes, reforms that ought to be made to make the system work for all of us, rather than for a very small group. And I worry that I'm a class, people accuse me sometimes of being a class warrior. I'm not a class warrior, I'm a class worrier. There's a big difference. That one letter is, I worry that if we let the thing get so far out of whack, the people, median wage continue to drop, more and more Americans feeling that the deck is stacked against them, feeling angrier and angrier, more and more frustrated, more vulnerable. See, when you have a lot of people who are angry, that doesn't necessarily lead to progressive social change. We know historically that can also lead to a lot of demonization and scapegoating and bias and some very ugly stuff. So I worry that the connecting sinews of society start coming apart, and we stop understanding that we're all in this together. And so that makes me a class worrier. So just to put a stop to my mouth for a second, I think that I want to see us mobilize and organize and energize to get these 12 or 15 reforms in place that will make the system work better. And as in some of you know this, campaign of 1936, Franklin D. Roosevelt was running for re-election. I don't remember the campaign exactly, but some woman came up to him and said, Mr. President, if you're re-elected, I want you to do this and this and this and this and this. And he said, ma'am, if I'm re-elected, I'd like to do that, all of those things. But you must make me. You must make me. Now, what he meant is exactly what we're talking about. He knew, back in 1936, he knew he could not, even Franklin D. Roosevelt, even in the Depression, even with, at that time, a Democratic Congress, he could not do it without people out there demanding it. Right. And that's the reality. Because I am so, I'm so short, I'm sort of conspicuous. You're fairly conspicuous. That's why we're brothers. We're brothers. So I don't know if you have this experience. Michael, I don't know if you have this experience. I go through airports, and people come up to me, and they talk as if we're in the middle of a conversation, as if, they come, so what do you think? Or, can you believe it? Or, yesterday I was coming up to here, and somebody came up and said, I don't know what to do. These are people I've never seen before in my life. So what do you do to somebody who says to you? But what they're actually doing, they want to have, they're involved in a discussion with themselves and with others and with me and with you, and they really they want connection. They really want to connect with other people about these things. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to connect about all of this.
I tell people, you have 10 friends, or 10 people that you can talk to. Each of them have 10 friends or family members, and each of them have 10 friends or family members. And literally, by just deciding to just do a little bit, to talk to people a little bit, you really could be talking to 1,000 people. And with social media, you really actually can, reach to that many people. And you do feel less alone if you start that ball.
And that's right. And with high unemployment and with low wages and people worried about their pensions, people start feeling alone and vulnerable. And that loneliness and vulnerability makes people,
it's a killer.
It deters people from taking political action because nobody wants to stick their neck out. So courage is part of the equation. And I said this yesterday, Michael, and I don't want to embarrass you, but I've been watching your movies forever, and I've been watching you forever, but it was right after George W. Bush started the Iraqi war, and you got your Oscar, and you came up there, and I was watching you getting Oscar. You went up there, and then you started to say something, and you started to talk about the war and lies and fantasy, and you used the precious few minutes you had up there getting your Oscar to begin to educate the public, and you showed more guts than almost anybody I had seen in public life. And from that moment, I thought, I love this man.
Thank you.
So courage, it's not just Michael Moore, but I mean, we all have to be, in our own little way, we have to be courageous.
I forgot to thank my agent. and my stylist. They never spoke to me again. That's very kind of you to say that, and I'm glad in hindsight it looks good, and I can smile. You're such a good person and such a good soul. I want to open it up to some questions here. So while you're formulating your questions and we get the microphones ready, I'll ask you one quick thing. The Canadians, explain to us why they didn't go through the crash, the banking thing that we went through. How is it that a half a mile across the Detroit River, they, even though they were watching the same Bachelorette, so you think you can dance TV shows, and they lived kind of the same life, and they look like us, and they talk like us, and they're bastards on the ice with the hockey sticks. And
Canadians, I mean, some of you may be Canadians, so what I'm going to say, I hope you take...
Reveal themselves. They're in here, but they're like...
They do look like us, and they do talk like us, but they are different. They're not as paranoid. They have a degree of perspective that allows them to accept certain kinds of regulations. I mean, their banking sector is not as crazy. They have accepted a degree of government that we have not been comfortable with. Government is not their enemy, and it changes. They have a different outlook.
They do seem to believe that the government is
government,
them.
by the way, government is us. Can we just be clear about that? Or it should be. It's us. And when people stop me in airports and they say, "What are we going to do?" I said, "Well, what are you doing about it? What are you doing about it? Stop complaining and start mobilizing and organizing."
Okay, who's got where's the microphone?
To your left, up front.
My left, up
Yep,
front,
your left.
and there you are.
Believing that Thomas Friedman said the world is truly flat, what paradigm shifts do you see America having to make now in order to best participate in a global economy or even compete?
Well, there are a lot of reframings. Let's put it this way. I mean, for one thing, there are very few American companies that are now American companies. That is, let me say that differently. The city or country where a corporation is headquartered has less and less to do with where its jobs are. So the whole idea of American competitiveness itself is not about the profitability of an American-based company. The whole idea of American competitiveness is about the ability of people called Americans to add value to this increasingly integrated global economy. If we add a lot of value, no matter whether we're working for a US company or a German company or a French company or a Japanese company, we are going to do better. Capital, in terms of financial capital, is global. It moves around the world at the speed of an electronic impulse. What's relatively immobile are people. And that's why investing in people, investing in our education, infrastructure, basic R&D, early childhood education, affordable college. Why investing in people is the essence of our American competitiveness. It's not trying to make our quote-unquote companies more competitive, because there's no "our" in terms of companies.
Right
Michael,
here.
where am I at? Over here, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's nice to run into Robert at Monterey Market in Berkeley every now and then. And also,
It's a great market, isn't it?
it's a great market. I also wanted to say, this idea of conservative, and I have some friends that call themselves conservatives, and I continually am asking myself and asking them, maybe you can answer this. Maybe there's one answer, but I think I might know it, but maybe you have a different answer. What do they conserve?
Well, I don't call, look at the conservatives, what conservatives traditionally have wanted to conserve is whatever we've achieved together, including the institutions of government as we understand them, the working of our democracy. Some of these people, particularly some of the new crowd that have come into Congress, some of the Republicans, they are not conservatives. I call them regressives, because they really don't want to conserve what we have. They want to move backward in time to before the environmental movement, before women's reproductive rights, before the Great Society, Medicare, before the New Deal, Social Security, minimum wage, before the progressive era, graduated income tax, progressive income tax. They want to go back to the 19th century social Darwinism. That's not conservative. That's really regressive.
My grandfather was head of the Republican Party in our town, and I remember him when he talked about conservatism. He said this: it meant you conserve your money, you don't spend money you don't have, you conserve the earth that God gave us, you don't pollute it, and the word he used that word in a very different way than what it eventually became, and I think that's very true. And I also, when I run into people like that, I say, look, I think we agree on more things than not. And if I'm stuck next to them on a plane, I get out a piece of paper. I always feel sorry for them, but and I draw a line down the center, and I go agree and disagree. Now let's make the list of the things we agree on, and it's always a longer list. We want good schools for our kids. We want clean air. We want clean water. We believe women should be paid the same as men. And every time I say something, yes, I agree with that, and they'll go, yes. I say, well, these are all liberal issues, So well, because they don't like to pay taxes. Some of them believe that their life, or that a human being, a fertilized egg is life, a sperm is life, an egg is life. These are all parts of life, but the human being, they believe that. They believe you should buy as many guns as you want and have, and some of these, there's 3 or 4 things maybe on the other side of the list, and I say, geez, God, we have so much over here. Can't we figure out how we can move forward on these things at least, and then let's agree to disagree on these other things, or let's have the great debate and let the American public decide.
Michael, even things that are controversial in Washington, like raising the minimum wage. You go out in the country. I remember in the 90s, I was trying to push a raise in the minimum wage, and I couldn't get any politicians from Washington to go along with it. That's, nobody wants to do that, because they were all listening to their business patrons. But then I convinced Dick Morris. You remember Dick Morris? In those days, he was in the Clinton White House, and he did polling. And I said, well, why don't you do a poll about the minimum wage? See how many people want to raise the minimum wage. And he said, okay. And next morning, he came back. I don't know. I don't know how he did his poll so fast. He must have polled his family. But anyway, so the next morning he said, unbelievable. 85% of Americans want to raise the minimum wage. I said, well, why don't you just take that finding to the president? And he did. Next day, the president said, by golly, we ought to raise the minimum wage. And then, why don't we go visit Republican and Democratic leaders in Congress with your poll? And then everybody wanted to raise the minimum wage. We get trapped into thinking that Washington and what is controversial in Washington is controversial in the country, and that is not always the case.
And when 90% of us want background checks on guns and Congress doesn't listen to that, I mean, whatever the nonviolent version is of the pitchforks and torches, you know, I mean.
In the balcony on your right?
On the balcony, yes.
Thanks. Professor Reich, you focus on the middle class, and the movie yesterday focused a lot on the middle class and on, you know, one of the elements of
Where are you?
I'm up here.
Right up there,
Very
yeah.
top.
Oh, I see. I'm sorry. Yeah.
On one of the elements of the Gini coefficient, which is wealthy people, but there wasn't a lot of discussion of poverty. And a fifth of the children in this country grow up in poverty. It's difficult to have conversations about the middle class, but it's almost impossible to have conversations in this country about poverty. Can you talk about decisions you make about, you know, how you focus?
Yeah. Well, in the movie, what we did very consciously is talk about, you'll see in the movie, we talk about the middle class and everybody aspiring to join the middle class, which is presumably everybody is poor. The big problem is that it's hard to talk about poverty and to get much action on poverty when you have the great people, the great number of people, the majority of people in the middle who are afraid because they're actually dropping. And you've got, it's easy to fan the flames of their fear that the government's going to come along and take away the little bit that they have and give it to the people who are poor. That's what you know, demagogues have been doing for years. And so the ideal, it seems to me, is to talk about the poor and the middle class together as and to get people to understand. And the thing that most people don't understand, even people who are dyed-in-the-wool Republicans, they don't understand how unequal America has become in terms of the concentration of income and wealth at the very top. Now, we were talking about facts before. Here's a fact for you. In 1980, the United States economy was big. We're now twice as big as an economy as we were then, even with the Great Recession. The economy is twice as large as it was in 1980, and yet the median wage for male workers, median, remember I'm talking about median, is lower, adjusted for inflation, than it was in 1980. Now, that's not because of the poor. That's not because the middle class has been taxed and everything given to the poor. It's because all that money, all of the gains from all of that growth have gone to the very top. And until people understand that, until they understand really the dynamic of the last 30, 40 years, it's very hard to get the political will to do much about poverty.
And we lost so much time here in Michigan in the 80s, especially living in Flint, in Detroit, Pontiac, Saginaw, Lansing, being bamboozled with the reason why the decline was starting and why we're in this Flint got to a point of 29% unemployment during the 80s. It's because of the Japanese. Japanese did this to you. It's those Japanese cars and the people that buy those Japanese cars. And it worked. I mean, in Flint, they'd be a weekly, you remember this, anybody? Get out the sledgehammer and they'd pull up an old Japanese car and bang the shit out of it. And it's sad. It's so how people who are suffering are so easily manipulated with these lies. And but the beginning of the Reagan era, boy, I swear to God, historians will count that as when the really began, and you have proven the slide. Just gave right there. I don't ever want to see him on the dime. I'm sorry.
The summer, I told Michael, the summer of '64, I spent summer of '64 in Flint, Michigan, and I was working for WTRX, the big sound of music and news in Flint, Michigan.
1330, the Jones Boys. That's right. Anybody remember that? Any Flintoids here? Yeah.
I have a question to your left in the back. To your left in the back.
Thank you. I'm a independent voter and a tax professional, and I'm looking forward to seeing your movie this afternoon. I have a question on your first point, or a comment and a question. The first fact is the fact that it's very true that under the Eisenhower administration, the highest marginal tax rate was 91%. The economy grew tremendously. But, and I was wondering about that. I was wondering how that could be true, since if you had a 100% tax rate, I think we'd all agree that that would reduce the incentive of people to work, and there would be less productivity, and the economy would not grow at a 100% tax rate. Yet it did grow at a 91% tax rate, and I always wondered why that was. And then I think I found the answer was that no one paid that rate because of tax shelters, because of trusts, because of corporate taxation. People paid a lot less than a 91% rate. So my question to you, if you could comment on that, but my real question to you is, what do you think is an appropriate highest marginal tax rate that's a true rate that people will pay?
I would go back to the Eisenhower years in terms of the effective rate. Now, you know what this because you're a tax professional, but I want to make sure everybody else does. The top marginal rate is the rate that people pay over a certain amount. So it wasn't that everybody who was wealthy was paying 91% of all their income. They were just paying 91% of income above the highest marginal tax bracket. And you're absolutely right. The effective rate after all of the deductions and after the tax credits was 54%. So I'd be happy to go to 54% for the highest bracket. But it doesn't, again, that doesn't mean that everybody who is wealthy pays 54%. It means that they just pay 54% over, let's say, $800,000. And people got very scared. I remember when the Obama administration, when the president was talking about taxing people over $250,000, the language itself was confusing to people. I had even friends in San Francisco who were earning $255,000. And they said, in San Francisco, $255,000 doesn't get me very far, and he wants to tax me, raise my taxes? No, he doesn't. He'll raise your taxes only on $5,000. That is the over $250,000. And it's that kind of stuff that
most people don't understand that.
They get
you agree with that?
confused about that.
Most people did not. Right. That's just as people don't understand that that the wealthy don't pay Social Security tax over $110,000 of their income, and you realize that if you make under $110,000, 100% of your income is taxed with Social Security tax. If you make $1 million or $10 million a year, only 1% or 10% of your income has to pay a FICA or a Social Security tax. Do you think if everybody, if you and I had to pay the same, that 100% of our income into Social Security, that everybody else has to pay 100% of their income, the money that would be in Social Security, I think I read, maybe this was from your book, that there'd be enough money in Social Security till like the year 2070 or something.
Well, actually, my proposal was slightly even beyond that. I said, let's exempt the first $15,000 of income, everybody's income. First $15,000 of everybody's income, exempt it from Social Security. And then let's eliminate the cap on the proportion of income subjected to Social Security.
Right.
So if you do both of those, Social Security is fine for the next 75 years, and you've got a more equitable Social Security system.
Just makes common sense.
Well, I mean, we can debate it, but let's debate it. If you don't like it, let's talk about why you don't.
Far right, all the way back, far right.
Our far right. Okay, it was hard for us to make that turn. All right.
Yeah. Hi.
A couple of months ago, I'll get to your question, but it reminds me, a couple of months ago, a policeman stopped me. A cop stopped me in Berkeley because I took a left where I wasn't supposed to take a left. He pulled me over. He said, "We can't all go left."
Yeah. Hi. My name is Albert. I'm a recovering Republican. I want to
Good morning, Albert.
Thank you. I missed the coffee in the hall, though. I want to start with a quick parable, and then I want to go into a question for you. I've done a lot of work in the former Soviet Union. I worked with a lot of Russians, Kazakhs, Uzbeks, you name it. Some Russian people once said to me, you know, the American people and the Russian people are a lot alike. They have great spirits, great hearts, they're willing to share, they want to have friends. But here's the big difference. In America, everyone expects everything to go correctly, to go right, to work perfectly. And when it doesn't, they get mad as hell. In Russia, we expect absolutely nothing to work at all. But when it does, we're extremely happy. And I really think that was a very good assessment. Now, I think we're all mad as hell right now, and we need to make it work. How can we build a center again which can gain a consensus of opinion to not make things go so bad, one way or the other, that we don't have to be extremely happy when something finally works correctly?
Well, I think that's a very profound and important question. I think that all social change in this country has come about when the gap between the ideal that most people think is the right goal and the reality that most people see that they're living in becomes so large that they can no longer deal with the cognitive dissonance between the two. And then when people start organizing and mobilizing and have the courage to say, we're just not going to live with that gap. Now that's very profoundly different from the old Soviet Union, because you don't have social, if you're cynical about any possibility of ever reaching any ideal, if you say it'll never work, then you can't possibly mobilize. So our great gift to ourselves is our sense of efficacy. And the great fear that we all ought to have about what's going on now is not that we're off track. I mean, we've been off track so many times before. The great fear is that so many people get so cynical about any possibility of positive change that they give up. And when they give up on our democracy, that's given up on the whole ball of wax. That just leaves it to the moneyed interests that would like it that way. That's the danger.
In Russia, what happened?
Yeah.
In Russia, what happened was they went from the czars, which we've heard a lot about in the past few years in America, to the oligarchs, who stripped all the wealth out of Russia, took it through Cyprus, and a heck of a lot of it's now in Long Island, New York, and other places. So
I know the corner it's on, actually. Yeah. Let's try and get as many as we can in here because we're going to have
Balcony
to
to your
wrap
right.
it up. Yes, let's go quickly. Yes.
Hi, I am a almost 46-year dues-paying UAW member. I proudly say this in this right-to-work state. My question is, if the Koch brothers, the Scott Walkers, the Rick Snyders, and all these other people, I'm right here, up in the balcony, I'm up here. I'll see if I can stand up. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. If they are successful if and when they are successful in destroying unions, what will they, the Heritage Center or Foundation, the Cato Institute, the Mackinac Center and stuff, what will they blame next?
Well, look, you know, I mean, the idea that Michigan could become a so-called, you know, right-to-work, to call it right-to-work is Orwellian to begin with, but a right-to-work state is just unbelievable. In the private sector, we were talking about this before, in the 1950s, you had 35% of American workers in a union, and that was enough to make even the non-unionized workers and the employers of the non-unionized workers agree to the prevailing wage from the major contracts. But now, you've got in the private sector, fewer than 7% of workers are unionized. And that means that there's not nearly the leverage to set anything like a prevailing wage. And what we've got to do, now some people say to me, well, unions are passé, there's no way we can compete internationally, you know, look, that's just not true. are major competitors. I mean, look at Germany. Germany has a much stronger unionized sector, has higher real wages, and has more manufacturing, and does more manufacturing exporting than the United States. So don't tell me that unions mean lack of competition. I know a lot of unionized workers in certain industries that enter into gain sharing or productivity sharing agreements with management so that the workers, who actually know better than almost anybody how to improve productivity, to make things better, every time they come up with a little invention, a little something that works better, they get some of the gains, some of the benefits. Employers who treat their workers as assets to be developed rather than as costs to be cut do better in the long term. And we know that. We know that. And really the problem is that a lot of employers are taking such a short-sighted view of the future, and part of that problem, frankly, is Wall Street. And we haven't really got into that very much now.
That's such an important fact, and it's in the film, and it's in his book. Please, he has all the sources for this. The more unions that are in a country, the more union members, the stronger the economy. Fact. It's just a fact. And boy, that is something that talk about another bamboozled in this country. It's just okay. Here, there's a lot of hands up. We have limited time, so could we do a lightning round to try and get as many in as we can? Is that okay with you guys? No speeches? Yeah. Every question, no more than 10 words, and we will give you no more than 20. How's that? Good?
Well, we can just get a bunch of questions and then respond.
Yeah, let's go. Okay, so who's got the first one? Ready? And I'll just call on you and shout it out. Ma'am, yes, right here. Quickly.
Mr. Reich, I am with the Inner City News in New Haven, Connecticut.
You know, we'll
All right, we got to keep the microphone. Hang on. 10 words.
You're with the Inner City News in New Haven, Connecticut.
Connecticut, and on behalf of New Haven and Yale, I thank you for a lifetime of service and for this one singular sensation movie. My question, should Hillary Clinton come to Washington as the next president, would you consider coming back to execute those reforms?
Yes.
How did the economic...
If she won't do it, is Elizabeth Warren okay?
My question is, how did the economic equation of the 50s and 60s, which benefited the wealthy, fall apart?
You have to watch the movie. I mean, that's a very important question.
Yeah.
Because in understanding how that came apart really is a key to understanding what we need to do in the future. So, but the movie is very much about that.
Beverly, right here.
Because almost half the states in the United States have an initiative process, I'd like to know if you feel that's a valuable tool for change.
Yes.
On the aisle, the man in the green.
I mean, just very, very quickly, you know, the initiative and the recall, all of that came out of the progressive era. And it's another example of how good ideas can get distorted, because right now, as we all know, initiatives can be put on ballots if you got X $1 million, and they become a vehicle for the very wealthy to basically manipulate politics. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way.
Man in the balcony, shout it out quickly.
Your Bernanke select. Who would you select to replace Bernanke?
Head of the Fed.
Well, let me just say, I know and have worked with Janet Yellen and Larry Summers, and I don't want to get into a lot of details. My nominee would be Janet Yellen.
Yes, right here, green shirt, quickly.
You wrote a blog a couple of weeks ago called An Impertinent Question. Could you share that with the...
Just the question, not the answer.
It was one question. and I simply said, and I took some heat for this, I said, you know, if you've got a group of people who hate government, who are pledged to shrink it and sink it down a bathroom, the hole in the bathtub, who want to pervert it using every technique they possibly can, such as gerrymandering and voter suppression and IDs, who really don't believe in how the Constitution separated powers, but want to use everything at their disposal, distort the filibuster, not raise the debt ceiling, which really are our payments on debts that we have, close government down if they can't get their way. And then I went on and on. It was a slightly rhetorical question. And then I said, would you call these people treasonous? Just a question.
Right behind you. Yes, right here. Yes, sir.
Because of this festival, I had the great opportunity to see the documentary, The Human Scale, about the architect Jan Gehl from Copenhagen. In your opinion, do you think the next economy is going to be less automotive?
Less automotive?
Yes. No, less automotive. To me, part of the problem, the underbelly of the American economy is the public spending on transportation. You know, from the wars in Iraq,
Right,
Afghanistan
okay.
to childhood obesity.
You mean to think of transportation in a different way, like our feet or trains? Or
Yeah. I do think that in an ideal world, I'm a very strong believer in smart growth. That is, you consolidate where people live. People live in more densely populated areas. You don't have suburban sprawl. People can get quickly and easily to jobs through public transportation. You have green fields, and you protect the environment between these particular nodes, and you have first-class public transportation connecting the nodes, not only connecting people to jobs, but connecting these nodes. Now, is that where we're heading? Is that America? Would people be willing to give up the freedom of their cars? That's another rhetorical question.
At some point, we won't have a choice. Right, yeah. Quickly, yes. Right here in the striped shirt. Shout it out. Here's the mic.
I think one of the biggest tragedies is the Supreme Court. One of the biggest tragedies is the Supreme Court ruling on Citizens United. One of the greatest threats to our democracy. How do you feel that that's going to be reversed, and do you think it will be?
If no other way, we've got to have a constitutional amendment reversing Citizens United. And I think there's great support for that.
And that amendment would say that corporations are not people.
Well, corporations are not people, and I think we could go further and say that money is not speech. Because if you put the... we've got it, the Supreme Court, it wasn't just Citizens United. It was a whole series of cases where they've kind of set it up. And if you have money as speech and corporations are people, well, then how are you ever going to limit the amount of money in politics? And we've got to. If we're going to take this, if we're going to take our democracy back, we have got to limit the amount of money that can be spent in American politics. We've got to have public financing of elections. We've got to have a very, very, very strong rules that keep people who are in office from ever using the revolving door to finance their own future careers after they leave office. This is something, we've got to have a fairness doctrine. We've got to get the fairness doctrine back, so we can't use Fox News and other outposts of our, to kind of lie to people. And we've got to have we've got to say to every broadcaster, if you want to use the airways, you've got to have free advertising time for legitimate politicians to get their ideas across without having to troll for money.
We have time for just two last quick questions, and it's going to be that woman and that man will be last. Yes.
You've talked about grassroots movements, which are very important, but they've always required successful ones, good leaders. Martin Luther King, Cesar Chavez, Mother Jones. Okay, so why now are our unions, do our unions not have good, charismatic leaders going around the country and pushing all these things you talk about? Why aren't we having mass demonstrations in cities for the minimum wage? Where are our charismatic union leaders? That's what I want to know. And my grandfather, you know, was a coal miner who struck, you know, with Mother Jones. So I know the history of grassroots movements, and people need leaders. We all need leaders. We're all here because of Michael Moore.
Well,
your parents had something to do with it.
I wish we had more time, because I teach a course. I teach one of my courses on the economy and on widening inequality, which our film is based on. But my other courses in the graduate school are on leadership and social change. And all I'm going to say to you is this: charismatic leaders are not what we need. Charismatic leaders set themselves up to be martyrs, to be shot down. You shoot the messenger and you get rid of the leader. Or they get literally assassinated. What we need is leadership from the ground up. We need people to understand that they can be leaders. You don't have to wait for the charismatic leader. That's the greatest social changes in this country.
Occupy Wall Street spread like wildfire with absolutely no leader or whatever. And we're not going to get into how that, I mean, that's not true. No. It ignited, it forced the president to start talking about the 1%. It doomed Romney when a waiter at a bar took a video of Mitt Romney to show what the 1%, how they really talk when they talk to each other. It defined a big part of the election. It didn't have it together in terms of the actual structuring of it, but don't you feel that
well, we may have a slight difference.
There's someplace in the middle
I think the point I want to make is that I think on Occupy they needed more practical managerial
but not a
leadership,
charismatic leader.
But that's not charismatic leadership.
Right.
And I think that there's a very fundamental difference between the two.
Okay. Right. Last question.
Yes, Robert. Everybody, I mean, it's very common for people in North America to talk about competitiveness, and we never hear about competitiveness in the healthcare industry. And I'd like you to talk about how much more our economy would be competitive if our healthcare industry were competitive and held to standards of like the Japanese or German, Swedish.
Well, look, this is another set. We could spend the next 5 hours. I mean, we have 2 minutes. Let me just say, our healthcare system right now is the most costly, by far, of any healthcare system in the world, and it delivers less, by far. Our infant mortality is the highest of any rich nation, any industrial nation. Our lifespan, average lifespan, is shorter than most industrial nations. We have less preventive care. I mean, preventive care. My father, at the age of 75, began walking 3 miles a day. He is now 99, and we have no idea where he is.
Let's hear it for Mr. Robert Reich. Thank you very much.